Creedence Clearwater Revival was an American phenomenon that from 1968 to 1962 enjoyed an impressive prestige and popularity. They dominated the radio with an unusual feat, a busy but prolific period of work, 7 albums in 4 years, more than 10 platinum records, and 8 number-1 singles. By 1970, and with the Beatles out of business, not only did they become the biggest band in the United States, they had triple the sales of the Rolling Stones. Pink Floyd had not taken off completely, and Led Zeppelin had not yet reached its peak. So for a few glorious months, they were without a doubt the biggest band in the world. In 1959, John Fogerty, Stu Cook, and Doug Clifford formed the Blue Velvets, an instrumental trio from El Cerrito, California, when they were just 14 years old. John's brother Tom was already a singer and sometimes picked them up as his backing band for concerts and demo recordings. But by 1963, Tom would join the Blue Velvets on a permanent basis. The four spent the next few years putting out failed records and touring Central and Northern California, playing small towns and military bases, also passing through a variety of names: the Visions, Tommy Fogerty and the Blue Velvets, or the Gollywogs. It was Tom, and not John, who led the band in its formative days, encouraging the group to think of music as a viable career. Without his energy, they might not have gotten anywhere. By the end of 1966, John Fogerty and Doug Clifford were drafted into the Army. Afraid of going to Vietnam, they served their term without going any further.
I got out of the Army in 67, and we sort of resolved to really, as adults, as grown-ups anyway, at the age of 22, to really go for it. To either we were really going to commit ourselves and everything we had, or else we weren't going to make it. So we pooled all whatever resources we had. Doug and Stu moved into a place together, actually. Stu sold his car for cash to help us buy equipment. We all kind of made a last-ditch, this is really it. We're gonna go for broke, try everything we can.
They had a contract with the Fantasy label, and by the end of 1967, they renewed it. And with a new owner in the company, they were able to negotiate new terms. The roles of each member of the band changed. Stu Cook would swap piano for bass, while Tom Fogerty became the lead rhythm guitarist, while John would assume the role of singer, writer, and leader of the band. With these changes and an embrace of new directions, they changed their name to Creedence Clearwater Revival to begin their legacy. The 3 words came from different sources. Creedence was the name of a friend of Tom Fogerty's, Creedence Newball. Clearwater was taken from a beer commercial. And Revival meant a reboot of their youthful ambitions and a return to rock and roll values of the 1950s. With foundations in rock and roll, country blues, and other genres, they began to form their sound. Their 1968 debut album, of the same name as the band, sold modestly at first. Its standout track was Susie Q, an 8-minute cover of Dale Hawkins' classic 1957 song. It was the band's second single, its first to reach the top 40, number 11, and its only top 40 hit not written by John Fogerty. 2 other singles were released from their May 1968 debut self-titled album, a cover of Screamin' Jay Hawkins' I Put a Spell on You, and Porterville, written during Fogerty's time in the Army Reserve. Then, Fogerty wrote a song about a man who shakes off the pressures of the city and finds harmony in the river. Its name? Proud Mary. This song was part of Bayou Country, his second album, a record that established his style. Released only 5 months later, it hit all the American bars. Creedence was beginning to establish itself as a rock and roll reference point. The band had the feeling that if they left the charts, people would forget them. Under this pressure, John Fogerty had his most creative and prolific period. Between 1969 and 1970, he was for many the most important songwriter from a socio-political point of view in the United States since Bob Dylan. Fogerty put Creedence to the test as musicians. They rehearsed hard until the arrangements of the songs were perfect. This allowed them to record complete albums in a matter of days. Green River was the next album. They were becoming more and more successful. In terms of touring, the band was also a resounding success, even playing at the legendary Woodstock Festival. Creedence's concerts was not finally included in the festival's video, nor in its soundtrack, because Fogerty himself considered that the concert was not very decent. The band complained that they had to go on stage in the wee hours of the morning. This delay was thanks to the Grateful Dead, who exceeded the estimated time by performing several jams. By the time Creedence Clearwater Revival took the stage, a significant number of the audience had left the festival. Despite the setback at Woodstock, Creedence kept busy recording their fourth album, Willie and the Poor Boys. Released in November 1969, Down on the Corner and Fortunate Son would reach number 3 and number 4 respectively by the end of the year. Like their previous studio works, Willie and the Poor Boys included covers of classic songs such as Cotton Fields and Midnight Special. The success of Down on the Corner, as well as its singles, served as a push for the final acclaim of Creedence at the end of 1969, who, in less than a year, had recorded 3 albums and 4 hit singles. Creedence flew to Europe to play a 2-week tour in April 1970. Jack Rohrer remembers arriving in West Germany and discovering that they were at the time bigger than the Beatles. Cosmos Factory, released in July, was their 5th album in 2 years. Its title was a reference to the band's Berkeley office space and also to their drummer Clifford, whose longtime nickname was Cosmo. In their own words, the album's front cover showed the 4 of them caught by a camera in an off-duty moment, a proudly uncool quartet who looked more like lumberjacks than rock stars. The album was huge in success, and the hit singles kept coming. Cosmos' Factory had 6 of them. While many mocked their commercialism, Creedence from that point on began releasing double A-sided singles. In the fall of 1970, Creedence was on top of the world. No one could have predicted what would happen next. After winning the hearts and love of America, the 4 members began to have personal differences, involving the friendships and the relationship between 2 brothers. Suddenly, the sharpest and longest divorce American rock and roll had ever known would begin. The problems began when the other members began to ask for a protagonism that Fogerty was not willing to yield. Since Proud Mary, they'd functioned under his hegemony.
Tom said something like, "Oh, so now you're going to produce the cover like you produced the records." But he wasn't happy when he said it. And I just thought to myself, ouch. Like, I didn't really realize what I was doing, but I think he'd call that leadership. What I was giving some direction. And Tom was clearly unhappy with that.
They felt constrained by John's vision of how a band was supposed to be run. They felt tied down and unprofessional. They didn't even have a concrete manager, nor a crew behind them on tour. Ironically, they even told him, "We are the #1 band in the world. We deserve a real manager." So, John Fogerty, under pressure and under a kind of cynicism, hired Alan Klein. Creedence's 6th album, Pendulum, had a more complete production sound than its previous albums, and had been a long time in the making. But this did not change the roles completely. Engineer Russ Gary recalls that Cook, Clifford, and Tom Fogerty were only in the studio for 2 or 3 days at most, as John overdubbed keyboards and saxophones. Tom left Creedence in early 1971 to begin a solo career. The others considered asking Duck Dunn to join, before deciding to continue as a trio.
We started as a trio. There we were. We were a trio again. But that was kind of, it was already, we had passed our Rubicon, our bridge too far. The rules were different now. It was a democracy. I was not the leader anymore. Everyone was going to sing. Everyone was going to write. Everyone was going to arrange. True democracy, just like Athens, So it was chaos, and it collapsed under its own weight.
50 years later, the allegations are so ironic on both sides that it's impossible to know who to believe. Fogerty complains that Cook and Clifford concocted a false story about him giving them a bizarre ultimatum in a limo after a gig in San Diego. According to Fogerty's version, the members demanded to write and sing a third of the next album each, or they would leave. While Cook and Clifford reject this completely, claiming that Fogerty threatened to leave if they didn't write and sing a third of the next album each. Around this time, an overwhelming perception among the other band members that John was being overly controlling and domineering was approaching a boiling point. John wanted to leave the band, Clifford said dismissively, but first he wanted to punish us for supporting Tom. Stu and I wanted some feedback, but the last thing we wanted to do was sing. But we wrote and sang songs, all 3 of us anyway, and, of course, the album was doomed to fail. John told the press that we would have to put a gun to his head, but it was the opposite. It was a cruel lie. 1971's Mardi Gras was the last record Creedence would ever make. I had a pretty good idea that the album would be terrible. I knew these guys from high school, and I thought I had a good handle on their abilities. The phrase I kept repeating to myself was, "I guess they deserve a chance," says Fogerty years later, who blames Cook and Clifford for forcing the songs on him. The relationships were over. Creedence broke up in 1972. John Fogerty began his solo career and released the Blue Ridge Rangers in 1973, a country bluegrass album on which he played all the instruments himself. In the years after Creedence's dissolution, some things leaked out. Cook and Clifford became convinced that Fogerty's mismanagement of the band's affairs had gotten them into trouble. The band members had lost millions in the banking scheme that turned out to be a scam. Fogerty's solo career failed in the mid-70s. He stopped recording, infuriated by a clause in his contract that seemed to demand increasing amounts of product as the years went on. Despite their animosities, Creedence reunited to play a couple of times, both on private occasions. First came Tom Fogerty's wedding in 1980. Then John Fogerty performed at the 1983 high school reunion in El Cerrito, and Creedence performed as the Blue Velvets just as they had in 1959. Sometime in the 1980s, Tom, who had undergone several back surgeries since 1974, became infected with AIDS from an uncontrolled blood transfusion. By 1989, his illness was a cause for desperate concern. Tom had one last request. He wanted Creedence to play one more time. The venue didn't matter. It could even be his living room or the hospital, but his brother John refused the request. Finally, recalls Stu Cook, when Tom couldn't even lift his arm properly because he was so weak, John said, "Okay, I'll play with you." The brothers never fully reconciled, and Tom died in 1990, bidding a bittersweet farewell to his brother. Creedence was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993. For Jack Rohrer, it was the saddest chapter of his career. Fogerty was upset that Cook and Clifford had sold part of their Creedence royalties.
I hear on the radio this commercial for an oil company that's got this album that you can get if you buy 5 gallons of gas or whatever, and it's a compilation, a whole bunch of different artists, and Proud Mary's on there, right? We finally learned that the other 3 guys have sold their voting right in Creedence to Saul Zaentz, my worst enemy, the guy at the record company. They sold their vote, even though we had agreed it takes unanimous vote, but that really betrayed me. I got word that Stu wanted to see me. This is perhaps a year after this, somewhere in the following year. He says to me, "Well, I've done a lot of things to hurt you, and so I want to apologize for that." To just accept that, I looked at him and said, "Stu, you go fix all those things that are still hurting me now that you set in motion, and then maybe I'll listen to your apology. But right now, it's a pretty empty apology. Okay. I'm still being clobbered."
Yeah.
And then I said, "And by the way, how in the world could you guys sell your vote to Saul? I mean, you know what he's doing to me. He's my worst enemy." And Stu says, "I just got tired of being asked, what movie should this song be in, or what compilation album should it be on. He said, besides, I don't care. I don't care about the music. Just give me the money." And I looked at him. There wasn't much more to say after that, but that was right there was the reason I didn't play at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with them.
Cook and Clifford arrived at the Hollywood Center with their families, expecting to play Creedence hits with Fogerty that night. The stage manager informed them that Fogerty would be performing without them, that instead there would be an all-star band, including Bruce Springsteen and Robbie Robertson. "It was humiliating," Cook said. "It was as if John thought he was being inducted instead of Creedence. He thought he could shut us out. It was a terrible night." Clifford, who considered Fogerty's career arc to be kind of Shakespearean, "The good news is that the music is what's important," Clifford says. "Look, we all made mistakes. It's unfortunate, but the legacy of the music is still there, intact. However, the swamp will surely freeze over before Creedence Clearwater Revival shares a stage again." In 1995, Clifford and Cook formed the band Creedence Clearwater Revisited, performing live versions of Creedence Clearwater Revival songs, and they toured until 2020. In January 2023, after 50 years, John Fogerty regained the rights to his songs, posting this on Instagram. "As of this January, I own my own songs again. This is something I thought would never be a possibility. After 50 years, I'm finally reunited with my songs. I also have a say in where and how my songs are used. Up until this year, that is something I've never been able to do. I'm looking forward to touring and celebrating this year. I want to thank Concord for helping to make all of this happen. And I'm excited for new ideas and a renewed interest in my music, like a revival. So ends the story of Creedence, one of the greatest bands in rock history. Their key point was to remind Americans of where they came from, to bring back their essence with those very American lyrics. A band that got it all very fast, and that's how fast they left. Thanks for watching. Comment on what other band stories you would like to see on this channel. Please subscribe. This is Music Box.